political Islam is a series of movements that have started to appear in the Middle East around the 1920s, and that all have in common that they want to reframe society and the state according to what they see as the correct interpretation of Islam. Once we've said that, this branches out into a whole set of movements. Of course, the most famous one is the Muslim Brotherhood. It's probably one of the oldest as well, created in 1928 by Hassan al-Banna, and it's been probably the most organized and the strongest. But a lot of smaller organizations exist that disagree with the Brotherhood on how they understand the state, how they understand Islam. Some would have a more conservative understanding of Islam, such as the Salafis. Some would have a more liberal understanding of Islam, such as Ennahda now in Tunisia, which proposes a program of government which is more liberal than the one the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt proposed. So once we've said that, you can see that depending on how they see the state and how they see Islam, it can produce very different political programs. In addition to that, groups like the Salafis tend to focus on society more than they focus on the state, right? So within political Islam, you also have those types of groups that consider that reforming the individual matters more than reforming the state. That is, reforming society through the individual matters more than reforming the state. And in addition to all of those, until now we've spoken about people who advocate peaceful means. So in the case of the Muslim Brotherhood, they advocate political participation. In the case of the Salafis, what they would do, at least for the majority of them, is preaching in mosques and having social activities. In addition to all of that, we also have more violent methods being advocated by other groups. Those other groups are generally referred to as the Jihadis, Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State. And again, they share with all the other Islamists this idea of reforming the state according to Islam and creating what they call an Islamic State. But what distinguishes them, as I said, is the fact that they advocate more violent methods to reach that goal. I think in the wake of the Arab Spring in 2011, the moderate or legalist Islamists were the ones who were the most prone to winning at the beginning. And that's what we saw in all the elections, because they were the strongest alternative to the existing regime on the ground. They were the most organized. And so when an election took place, in most of the cases, they would come first and they would win the elections, which they did, of course, in Egypt with an overwhelming majority, but also in Tunisia, although they had less votes, but still they came first, and so they were able to form the government. So for a while it seemed that political Islam was going to win, and there was the sentiment that should the Arab Spring continue, these parties would be the greatest victors of the moment. But things soon transformed into something completely different, right? There was a backlash in a way. Starting from 2013, the backlash came for the range of different reasons. Of course, the old regimes that had been overthrown had not been completely overthrown and tried to make a comeback in some cases. Certain regional forces, certain countries such as Saudi Arabia and the UAE also launched a regional effort to try to bring things back to what they were before, to recreate some kind of authoritarian order. I think the Islamists also suffered from the fact that they came to power in very difficult economic and social situations, and they were largely unprepared, I think, to those situations, and they made a number of mistakes which clearly contributed to their eventual downfall. So from mid-2013 we see all these different moderate Islamists who not long before appeared to be the victors, now appearing to be the losers, right? The coup in Egypt, Ennahda, losing the elections in Tunisia and being forced finally into a coalition, but a coalition in which they were the junior partner. And this opened the second phase with the comeback of the Jihadis, right? the jihadis had from the late 2000s experienced a moment of decline. To the extent that when the Arab Spring started in 2011, many people saw that as, being the nail in the coffin of jihadism, because now it was demonstrated that things could change through civil movements, that there was no need for violence. By 2013, the jihadis could easily tell to the Islamists, you tried it. It doesn't work. You wanted democracy, look what happened to you. And so the jihadis experienced a moment of rebirth. Of course, this also had to do with the situation in Iraq and Syria, and the fact especially that in Syria the revolution had turned into an armed conflict, which provided opportunities for the jihadis. And so from 2014, what we see is that moderate Islamism, Muslim Brotherhood groups, appear to be in a state of profound crisis. With the Muslim Brotherhood in exile, the leaders in Turkey or in Qatar, and being persecuted in the countries where they once were the government. And at the same time, the jihadis gaining ground, gaining recruits, the proclamation of the caliphate by ISIS in 2014, and a new phase with the rise of jihadism, and again its eventual decline, but this time through an external intervention with the anti-ISIS coalition that was formed. So if we look at things as they are now, I think that political Islam in all its different forms, right? The participatory forms, the legalist forms, on the one hand appear to be in crisis still. Jihadism has been militarily defeated, so the Islamists seem to be a bit absent these days. I think we shouldn't be mistaken, right? I think the reason why they're absent is because the region is experiencing a return of a more brutal form of authoritarianism, which is crushing any alternative, which means that basically politics is disappearing from certain countries in the region. Today, there's no politics left in Egypt. So, of course, there's no Islamists, there's no politics. It doesn't mean that should the situation change, groups like the Muslim Brotherhood would not reappear and they would not be able to regain the vote. It does not necessarily mean that it's going to be the Muslim Brotherhood. It could be other groups splitting or emerging from the Muslim Brotherhood. But I think that the appeal of political Islam somehow remains. We should not bury political Islam too quickly, because those who did that 20 years ago were proven wrong, and those who did that 50 years ago were proven wrong. So I think political Islam remains a structural force, and it has been for 100 years in Arab political fields, right? There's always been the Arab nationalist on the one hand, the Islamist on the other hand, representing to some extent, if we want to de-dramatize things, it's basically the equivalent of the right and the left in European political spectrums, right? The Islamists would probably represent the right, the conservatives, right? With all their different variations, and from the more liberal centrist types to the more radical types. It's a political family as we understand political families in European or Western politics. In that sense, again, I think we should not be mistaken by seeing this as the end of political Islam, as an ideology, as a political family. Although I think we can clearly say that those last 7 years will produce a transformation of political Islam for sure, that the Islamists who will eventually re-emerge will probably not be the same than the one we knew back in 2011. For better or for worse. And this is what we'll see, but it's too early to tell.